Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Federal Bar Association program on hot topics in cybercrime and crypto. My name is Randy Sue Pollack, and I'm the president of the Federal Bar Association for the Northern District of California. We have a very impressive panel this evening, and Judge Corley will be introducing them in a few minutes. Before that, I'd like to welcome everyone who is a Federal Bar member and encourage those of you who have not yet joined to please do so. Our chapter is a very active one, and we've been presenting at least 1 to 2 programs every month. The Federal Bar was founded in 1920 to serve the interests and needs of the federal practitioner, both public and private, the federal judiciary, and the public that they serve. The Federal Bar has over 18,000 members and over 2,000 members of the judiciary. Our chapter has many upcoming events that I'd like to just briefly tell you about. On May 1st, there's going to be nationally Recognition of Law Day. There are going to be rallies here at the San Francisco Federal Court, as well as the Oakland Federal Court, and as well as a rally of attorneys. It's going to be, hopefully, the attorneys will be retaking their oath of office as attorneys. So I encourage you to all go to that event. On May 14th, we're going to have a reenactment of the Delano grape strike. That's going to be here in this courtroom, and we have a special guest, Attorney General Rob Bonta, who is going to be a part of that program. May 21st, in this courtroom, we're going to have a program, the civics, the honorees of the civics essays. So I encourage you to come to that program to support the high school students who wrote essays. Then June 12th, we're going to have a program here for young lawyers and law students on choosing your legal pathway. We're going to have attorneys who have put out their shingle to have their own practice, those who've gone into public service, those who are in startups, and those who went to the course of big law. So it should be a really good panel. September 11th is our annual Ninth Circuit luncheon with the Ninth Circuit and the Northern District Court judges. We're going to have a panel discussion about the independence of the judiciary, and I'm hoping that Judge Fogel will moderate that with at least 2 retired judges. October 9th, we're going to have a Meet the New Judges here in this courtroom, which will include the San Francisco judges as well as the San Jose judges. And then November 12th, we have our class action update, and one of the panels we're going to have will be on mass arbitrations. That's not all the programs we have, but it's a good example of what's coming up the rest of this year. So I encourage you to join the Federal Bar. There are signups outside with a QR code. So just click on that and you can join. I'll now turn the program over to Judge Corley.
Good evening. I'm Jacqueline Scott Corley, a district court judge here. They asked me to be the moderator because I know absolutely nothing about what they're going to be talking about. And so I view my role as to say, now what? What's that? What do you mean, to sort of help out some of you who maybe don't know? I'm just going to do a 1-line introduction of each person and then have them tell you a little bit more about their experience and how they're here. To my very far left down their end is Donovan McKendrick. He's a Department of Justice Special Assistant United States Attorney and FBI agent, Cyber Division Cybercrime. Immediately to his right is Will Frenson, a partner at Morrison & Foerster, but many of you probably know him as being longtime Assistant United States Attorney and former Chief of Corporate and Securities Fraud here in the Northern District of California. Immediately to Will's right is Tegan Gambarayan. Sorry if I said that wrong. He's head of financial crime compliance at Binance and former IRS criminal investigator, cyber crimes. And then to my immediate left is Alex Iftimi, Deputy General Counsel at OpenAI and former partner and co-chair of Global Risk and Crisis Management at Morrison & Foerster. We can start with Donovan if you want, can give a little bit more background. And in doing so, if you could also tell us, when you say cyber, what you mean, and when you say cryptocurrency, what you mean.
Certainly. Thank you for that, Your Honor. I'm Donovan McKendrick. I'm both a Special Assistant U.S. Attorney and FBI agent. I've been in the FBI for over 11 years now. I first worked organized crime, focusing on money laundering, pharmaceutical diversion, and the numerous different violent crimes that organized crime groups, especially in LA, will and do tend to commit. I moved then into cyber national counterintelligence and cyber crime, and as a special assistant U.S. attorney, I focus on asset forfeiture, especially in cryptocurrency, as well as other investigations involving cyber crime. So cyber, when I say cyber, what I'm referring to are those specific crimes and the activities involving not just computers, but also the access and usage of computers and blockchain technology and emerging technologies. In my context, in the context that I'm looking at it from, it's the usage of computers, code, software to commit crimes against both US entities and individuals. Blockchain technology has many various uses. It is essentially a public ledger, just like banks utilize to, to record whether or not somebody is paying or owes money. And that can be used publicly for any number of different uses, such as agriculture or real estate purchases. My focus, of course, is the usage of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology to transfer financial funds, and especially for crime. I now hand it off to Will.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. It's good to see some friendly faces in the room that I haven't seen in a little while. It's good to be back in the courtroom, sort of in different capacity. I'm a partner at Morrison Foerster in San Francisco. Been there for several years. At least in this context, like to think of myself as a trial lawyer with a crypto problem, to the extent that I delve into this area and have done so for a long time. And so I'll just sort of focus on, while I was an assistant United States attorney for a very long time, in about, I think it was probably 2012 or 2013, I first got involved in some cases involving cryptocurrency, working with the gentleman to my right, Tigran, who at that time was a special agent with IRS criminal investigations here in the Bay Area, and sort of took off with an investigation that related to the Silk Road case, which is sort of this one of the original large drug markets that was able to sell drugs all over the world utilizing Bitcoin and maybe other crypto. I don't remember. I remember it's predominantly being Bitcoin as a particular type at that time. And it turned out there were two federal agents who were, one DEA, one Secret Service, who were corrupt agents. And while they were supposed to be investigating this dark marketplace, were actually stealing crypto themselves. And Tigran was the lead case agent. We brought the case here in the Northern District of California and caught these two agents. And so that was kind of the very first time that I got involved in it. And like I say now, it's 12, 13 years ago. And that just sort of led to more and more cases being brought our way here in the Northern District of California. And Tigran can talk to you himself about the many huge cases really that he brought. And he's a pioneer sort of in the space of investigating these kinds of cases. So I kept getting involved in these various investigations and large scale cases, sort of culminating. I worked with Donovan and Tigran on the Twitter hack that happened shortly after COVID in like 2020. If you remember, it was big news at the time because someone hacked Twitter and they got in and took over the accounts of Elon Musk and Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and others. And so that was a case we investigated and solved together. Since I left and went to Morrison Foerster, I have gotten clients who are in the crypto space I'd say predominantly they call me when something goes drastically wrong. And usually it's some sort of a hack or an exploit or otherwise need to try to assist them in figuring out what happened, internally dealing with the problem, ideally recovering money and figuring out who did it and trying to assist my former colleagues in law enforcement in trying to bring a case. Correspondingly, I have also dealt with regulatory authorities. I can talk about a little more who sometimes come along and decide that not only was the crypto entity a victim, but may also have had some issues themselves. And so I've dealt with some cases related to that. But anyway, I had some success recovering money, about 300 million, I think, in recovery since leaving. So that's been sort of exciting and something that's good to do for clients, obviously.
Do you do that on contingency?
I may be scolded for this, but I will say that originally I was told we don't do this kind of work on contingency, and subsequent folks have asked me, why didn't you do that on contingency? So hopefully that's not divulging too much, but yeah, I wish. Sorry, I was just going to say with respect to your question, Judge Corley, with respect to cyber, I would have just said computers. So I would sign on to Donovan's answer as being much more thorough. When I think about cryptocurrency, I think, yes, it's, originally there, it sort of began, I think, with Bitcoin and with other currencies, and that's certainly been sort of a large focus in the industry. But the industry does strive for lots of other uses. And I think of it in terms of decentralization and where the industry and sort of there's another corresponding term that's come about, which is Web3. The idea being, the internet, and then this is Web3. And the idea being that these are systems that are often open source, although not always, but often open source, and that effectively run on in a decentralized fashion on many, many different systems. I'll say computers, but that's probably the wrong term. In a way that no single individual can take over the system. And it's that decentralization and it being spread across many different systems that allows for the ability to avoid any one particular attack point. In other words, because it's decentralized, because it's spread out over so many different systems, effectively you would have to hack thousands, if not millions, of computers simultaneously to be able to take control of the system. I have probably described that in a way that everybody else on this panel who's more technically inclined than me will say is wrong, but at least maybe it's helpful to understand part of the structure that I think of when I think of cryptocurrency or Web3. Thanks.
Tigran?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's good to be back. I haven't been back here in years. Started here as a baby agent. NDCA was always my home. Worked, I guess, most of my career as a special agent with Will, with Donovan. Had a pleasure of, really developing my skills as a special agent in this district and continue to work with. Last time I was here, this was well after I left San Francisco, but this is last time I was in this building. We ended up making the largest seizure of assets in history. It was 70,000 Bitcoin. So that was my last time I spent in this building. And since then, I joined Binance. I joined Binance in 2021 as the head of financial crime compliance to develop their compliance systems, their law enforcement response, their investigative methodologies, and everything you can think of and saw them through the settlement with the Department of Justice in 2023. And like Will mentioned, before that, I was a special agent and spent most of my career, I guess, working cryptocurrency and cyber cases for IRS. What that meant is having a computer and doing cyber things. They were not, well, jokes aside, I mean, when I left San Francisco, I headed out to DC to start the NCI-JTF virtual currency team, which was a task force that was dedicated to developing cryptocurrency methodology, and also starting the IRS-CI cyber crimes unit. When headquarters came in, they gave us a laptop and told us to go investigate cyber stuff. And they had no idea what they were doing, neither did we, but we kind of figured it out along the way. And we ended up making some pretty cool cases along the way. Took down some of the most notorious websites on our darknet, including Alphabay, Welcome to Video, which is a large CSAM network. Ended up rescuing over 20 kids from active abuse, arrested over 380 individuals around the world. Along the lines of one of the cases that we're going to get into, Helix, is one of the cases that we discussed. That was also part of the Washington, D.C. cyber crimes unit, which we were all involved in. And yeah, Twitter case, and that was one I had the pleasure of meeting Donovan and working with him and stayed friends, and kind of our lives have been intertwined since then in many ways that we'll get into later on. But it's a pleasure to be back. Thank you.
And you would adopt
and for-
Donovan's definition?
So for yes, I would. I think for the most part, but it's also an evolving thing, right? What cyber means now is not what cyber is going to mean later. It's also and where is that threshold where one crosses from normal to cybercrime, and also for where is the threshold for what cryptocurrency versus normal crime is? As cryptocurrency is being more adopted, this is becoming like money these days. Do you then just call it crime? Do we call it crypto crime? So that's kind of it's an ever evolving thing that I think, you know, at what point does AI enter the picture? New technology gets developed. Is that part of cyber now? Who knows? That's what we'll find out today.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I am the Deputy General Counsel at OpenAI. I oversee national security, cybersecurity issues, as well as investigations of misuse of artificial intelligence, particularly when it relates to cyber issues, child safety, national security issues. I was previously at Morrison & Foerster working on cyber incident investigations and things like that. And before that, I got my start at the Department of Justice, where I was in the National Security Division in DC, working on issues ranging from intelligence surveillance reform to economic espionage to terrorists' use of the internet, election meddling, other things like that. And I suppose taking the issue of cyber, I think I had kind of the same realization too. I think Donovan's definition is encompassing of artificial intelligence, and it's interesting to think about how the world of cyber is really expanding, and it's only going to continue to expand as you think about the novel applications of technology and of artificial intelligence in our lives. And maybe I'll take a twist on that definition and focus more narrowly on, well, what is artificial intelligence as a subset of cyber? And it, you know, at its most basic level, it is taking energy, data, and computers, you know, chips and systems to create intelligence. And that is a fascinating concept to take those three inputs and to think that, you know, we can create transformational developments in healthcare, in life sciences, and in any number of other domains by simply, you know, applying those three tools. And, you know, we at OpenAI focus in particular on large language models, one part of a broader AI ecosystem, and that is really taking a vast amount of data and training computers on the relationships between words, and from that to get systems that can answer your questions and that can engage with you on developing new information and sharing information.
If I could, I mean, based on everybody else's definitions, I'd like to amend my own.
Okay, I give you permission.
Never want to be the first guy.
Leave to the woman.
Well, and I will say, so I forgot to give this caveat. I'll probably be one of the more boring presenters because I cannot present on active investigations because I am still, unfortunately, unfortunately, depending on your perspective, a Department of Justice employee. I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the president or anybody else. And one interesting aspect is looking at as being both a special assistant U.S. attorney and an FBI agent. I can see where there's conflict in this definition of cyber because from the FBI's perspective, cyber crime involves computer intrusions, and that is the key. Where we have a cyber crime and we have a white collar squad that are constantly trying to figure out which cases they are going to take if it involves computers. And of course, every crime basically involves computers. Every crime involves a phone, even if it's a robbery. Somebody's going to look up a victim's address in their cell phone, or they're going to identify an individual based on, you know, a login to a computer network or a computer search. And so, you know, we constantly have to figure out: is this cyber crime? Is this cyber? Is this a computer intrusion? Is somebody breaking into a network and stealing information? Is somebody using AI to target a company? Is somebody stealing the trade secrets that belong to a blockchain company? Or are they committing fraud with these technologies, with AI, with cryptocurrency, with a computer? And so I would say that my definition of cyber very much, of course, depends on who you speak to. But from the FBI's perspective, cyber crime are computer intrusions, while from the DOJ perspective, it seems that it's anything that uses compute power, basically. So
Great.
that's my amended answer.
So now I think what we all want to know from you experts is what are the sort of greatest cyber threats that the private sector is facing today? And we'll start with Alex, and from sort of the AI perspective, we've all heard all the nightmares that could happen if you don't do your job very well. So what are the biggest threats that we're facing?
Well, and I will answer the question as you phrased it, but I also want to emphasize when I think about the greatest cyber threats that I worry about on a daily basis, it's also thinking about how do we protect the assets that we've built at OpenAI and within the AI sector. You know, this technology is a national asset. It's something that is going to be tremendously valuable for our economic growth, for our ability to compete in the world. And so one dimension of the greatest threat question is how do we protect those assets? How do we make sure the technology we are building is in safe hands, remains under democratic rule? And that is a key dimension of it. And of course, then there is the question of making sure this technology doesn't get used for harm. There are all of these amazing applications of artificial intelligence that we ought to promote. I spend a lot of my time thinking about how do we minimize the bad uses of artificial intelligence. And like any technology in the world, it will be used for good and it will be used for ill. And in the cyber context, there are a variety of ways we've seen the technology be misused. I will say the capabilities are not truly transformational in what it allows the bad guys to do yet. We're not seeing our technology independently hacking into banks and stealing assets. We're not seeing our technology developing zero-day malware that is, you know, being used to hack into nuclear reactors or things like that. But we are seeing the technology augmenting the capabilities of people who are out there committing fraud or looking to steal technology. In one dimension is it just makes all of these actors much better at communicating. We see better phishing messages because they're able to say, make this message sound like it actually came from a bank, or this text message look like it came from a friend. We are seeing the technology be used to translate or to help hackers troubleshoot their code, you know, find issues with the way they're trying to do a particular thing. We're seeing the technology be used by actors who want to spread disinformation to develop personas and then to write messages in the voice of those personas and to do it at a much better level than they'd been able to do prior to the use of that technology. And so let me pause there. We can talk about some of the concrete examples as we get further into the discussion.
Okay. Tigran.
Yeah, sure. I think trying to say it lowers the barrier of entry to doing crimes. I think that's, but just not to totally kind of dump on the technology, and I'll kind of get into why. But what it does is it allows for more sophisticated attacks by people who may have ordinarily not be able to do those things. Right? We're talking about using AI to whether to fool companies, right, into hiring, let's say, nation state actors, which we see, right, where DPRK has been using AI and certain things to actually be hired on. With attempts we've made, it would have been a Binance to be hired on as an employee to be able to get.
DPRK.
Yes, as in the North Koreans.
Of North Korean. Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
so who've been to compromise, be able to get hired by both cryptocurrency companies and tech companies to do complete interviews.
They're putting agents
Yeah, as in people get hired by companies and using very sophisticated tools to be able to seek employment, get hired, be able to compromise systems, those methods. But that's one side of it, right? But the other side of it is, right, it's an arms race both between nation states, but it's also an arms race between the good guys and the bad guys, right? Just as it's easier to do those things, right, to do those attacks. It's also empowered both law enforcement, right, to be able to use, and both, let's say you have to parse code, or you have to go through, without having to kind of sit there and waste time. Now AI is empowering investigators, both the law enforcement and compliance, to do these complex investigations fairly quickly. So for me on my end, building out our compliance teams, AI has empowered us to scale our compliance teams and be able to handle and alerts that are coming in from our screening services, to be able to be on more of a lookout and be able to detect bad guys using cryptocurrency to do bad things easier. So I guess it's both, right? So it's both made it easier to do crime, but it's also helped law enforcement to go after those guys. Again, it's an arm race.
So is that what you think is the biggest threat? that
No, the
you
biggest
said?
threat is, I guess it depends, right? So the biggest threat, when we're talking about just dollar amount wise, we're talking about pure fraud, we're looking at cryptocurrency. There's various ones, but I'd say the investment frauds, the pig butchering schemes where investors are being targeted, that's definitely one of the big ones. You're still seeing larger payouts on ransomware. Ransomware is also not necessarily getting easier, but people are able to use tools like AI, like we're talking about parsing code and cleaning up code and making things easier to pull off by the bad guys. So and also nation state actors, right? We're also looking at DPRK being able to leverage technology to be able to pull off more sophisticated attacks, clean up language, just be able to be better at things.
Okay, I think I'm not going to use the computer anymore. All right, go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I wasn't too worried about anything until I listened to those two, but now I'm pretty nervous. No, but just from my perspective in terms of what I see on a regular basis and who some of my clients are and what we see, I think that there's I have the expectation there are so many different ways for hackers, exploiters, however you want to refer to them, to have success. And I think about cases like the Twitter case we worked on, fundamentally was social engineering, where they took advantage of the fact that Twitter and everybody after COVID were suddenly dispersed. And they set up relatively sophisticated fake websites and reached out to relatively new Twitter employees, and were able to convince at least some of them to go on to this site as an IT page to set up their remote work, that they eventually got sufficient information to get access. And I'll just, that's one example, right? And then I'll compare that to a client who had a crypto lending, borrowing, and trading site and got taken for 200 million. And the scam was basically just setting up trades and then being able to have a massive influence on one of the particular types of crypto, so that for a very, very brief period of time, they had the ability and the collateral, at least in the mind of the system, to be able to remove clean the place out of $200 million. I guess my point is these are incredibly different means. And so I think that, and this is true, I think, across the board in the world of hacking and so on, there are so many different ways that things like that are going to persist. And in my mind, at least in the crypto world, that's part of the game. The other part of the game is once they get the money, because it's on this decentralized ledger as crypto, it is always visible. It is traceable and Tigran here basically is one of the original or first tracers of cryptocurrency. And it was, at one point, it was a misnomer among hackers and so on. They thought once they got the funds in their possession, they were home free, but they weren't. Because from that point on, then to be able to use it, they had to hide it or disguise it further. And so in my mind, assisting clients and individuals who have been subjected to a massive theft in the crypto game, then there's the issue of tracing the money, because if they can't hide it, if they can't launder it because it's publicly visible, then they can't really use it. And so in my mind, one of the largest threats is mixing services, tumbling services, and other systems by which, because of trading and things, you can then obfuscate who is the actual owner of the crypto in a way. That's one of the largest, I think, threats. And there is currently, I think, some question, I think we'll get into the most recent DOJ memo, but there's some question about where those kinds of services, money laundering services or privacy services, as some of people see them, is going to fall on the spectrum. And if that gets really sophisticated, then once the money's gone, it may just be gone and you won't be able to track it. One just last thing I'll throw out is, in my mind, in terms of big fear, is not the huge dollar amount thefts, because someone's always going to be, the Donovans and previously Tigrans of the world are always going to be interested in those and they're going to chase them. There's a band of thefts, hacks, cyber, and this is probably true of fraud also, where local law enforcement is not sophisticated enough to deal with it, and the feds are too busy to deal with it because it falls in this gap between what the thresholds are. And it's nobody's fault. It's just how these things happen. And until the locals have the capacity to be able to deal with it, I get calls all the time from people who say, my money has been stolen. Can you help me? And the answer is, it's not going to be worth it to pay me to help you. I'd love to refer you to somebody, and I will, but you've got a problem here in getting the Fed's attention. Again, I'm not blaming anybody. This was true when I was a Fed. I don't have time to chase all of these, and the locals aren't necessarily cut out to do it. And so just in terms of there is a massive amount of fraud in that band of money that regular people are losing out on, and they're the ones who are least able to do anything about it, and they suffer the most when they lose it. And so that's, I think, going to continue to be a growing problem. And it's things like pig butchering and so on.
I mean, following up on that, I think that unfortunately that is the case, that we just don't have enough agents. We don't have resources to work every single case, and I wish we could. In the FBI, we prioritize based on the spectrum of cyber threats and cyber criminal activity. You start with the hacktivist, which is lower end. It's essentially individuals that wish to commit cybercrime specifically for a political purpose or to send out a political message or a social message. They might steal information and then post it with a commentary about whatever they are most interested in. Moving on from that, you have the individuals that are focused on cybercrime for financial purposes, for financial gain. So that's where you have ransomware, that's where you have pig butchering, individuals that will send you that message that say, hey, I got one today, for example. Hey, you didn't show up to the coffee shop. And then, of course, if you respond, they will say, oh, you seem like a really nice person. Here's a photo of me. And then you start a conversation. Next thing you know, they want you to invest in cryptocurrency and then you think that you're making $1 million because you put in $10,000. According to this app, it says you got $20,000. And the reality is you're not making any money when you eventually put $100,000 or $1 million or $2 million and you mortgage your house. You think you've made all this money. Reality is it's all gone. And that's the financially motivated criminal. So that's a step up from what we call the hacktivist. You then have the insider threat, those individuals that work inside the company that already know the networks, already know the system, and they want to commit whether it's to damage, commit a heinous act to damage the company, water infrastructure as an example. Maybe they want to make a political statement, but they're an insider. And so we categorize that as a higher threat level. Then from there, you have cyber espionage. And that's where we're getting into nation state actors that want to steal information for their own nation's gain. And that's where we're dealing with, adversarial countries that may want information from US entities, from OpenAI, from Binance, from wherever it might be, to help the nation state. And then you have cyber terrorism, an individual that wants to do damage to our national infrastructure, that wants to harm individuals, and that their motivation is terror. Their motivation is similar to the hacktivist in that they wish to send a political message, but they want to do so through harming individuals. And then finally, we have cyber warfare. So warfare, as we're all familiar with the general concept of war, but when it comes to cyber, we know for a fact that there are nations that have put out their MO, like the manner in which they are going to damage and harm our communications infrastructure to, for example, slow down a kinetic response to an invasion. Certain nations have already put out their battle plans that literally step one is shut down communications of our adversaries so that they cannot communicate, and it'll give us time to move our ships or our planes or whatever it might be, and give us a head start. And so we're moving from, again, to that spectrum. We have hacktivists, we have the financially motivated criminal, we have the insider threat, cyber espionage, cyber terrorism, and then finally cyber warfare. Anytime we're dealing with a threat, anytime we're dealing, for example, the Twitter hack, because Barack Obama, because Elon Musk, because Joe Biden's accounts were being taken over, we didn't know, is this a distraction? Is this a precursor to war? Is this a telecommunications or an attempt to interrupt and also to distract from another kinetic attack or some other action? We have, for example, seen nation state actors utilize ransomware to destroy information when they're actually trying to really steal information for the nation state and then basically burn their house down on the way out. And so there are certain nation states that they take that destructive methodology to hide the espionage and the precursor actions that they plan on taking. And so from our perspective, from the FBI's perspective, categorizing and prioritizing those threats is a huge part of how we respond to cyber. And when it comes to AI, we look at it from three different perspectives or three different categories. First, it's criminals that are using AI to commit harm. Companies and individuals that are AI washing. They're essentially saying, I use AI to, search images online and help you with your marketing plan, as an example. And when you actually look behind the curtain, they're raising all these funds, but the reality is they're not actually using AI. They're hiring people outside of the country to do that by hand, which may be an actual example. And then The third is, of course, protecting our nation state secrets and protecting companies like OpenAI, because we know for a fact, with no doubt, that there are countries and that there are actors out there that want to obtain the trade secrets that belong to our US entities that are developing AI. And so those are the three categories that, again, we prioritize and that we are looking at. And so when it comes to cyber threats, though, I mean, based on the spectrum that I mentioned earlier, cyber warfare is the greatest threat because that's a nationwide response and that's a nationwide impact. And then I would say what keeps me up at night is the cyber terrorist, somebody that uses AI and that uses the infrastructure that we have accessible in the United States to commit a harmful attack.
So Donovan, since you're aware of all these, let me ask you, do you get in a Waymo?
I have never been in a Waymo.
Okay, all right.
But-
That's what I've been wondering.
I rode Waymo for the first time today.
But I will say, I mean,
I'm afraid of being hacked.
I think there's a good conversation because I probably would trust a Waymo with my kids more than I would trust maybe certain Uber drivers.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you know, I know that it's relatively safe compared to
Okay,
certain
all right,
drivers.
that's good to know.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, Will, the memo, the ending regulation by prosecution. So maybe Donovan, you could just explain to us as our DOJ FBI representative, sort of at a high level, just what it means. And then I want to ask Tigran, as our Binance person, do you like that?
Yes. I know there have been a great amount of attention and a lot of conversations about the ending regulation by prosecution memo, which I have literally in front of me, signed by our Deputy Attorney General. It ensures that the Department of Justice is prioritizing, and I'll read it out because I want to make sure I don't misstate this, that we prioritize cases that hold accountable individuals who cause financial harm to digital asset investors and consumers and or use digital assets in furtherance of other criminal conduct such as fentanyl trafficking, terrorism, cartels, organized crime, and human trafficking and smuggling. I will say that the cases that I've worked on, that was my priority, and that's what we were already looking at. We were looking at those, for example, cryptocurrency companies or businesses that were using cryptocurrency in furtherance of human trafficking, drug smuggling, of harming minors, of harming consumers, of stealing money from individuals and then laundering it through that platform. And so the work continues. We are not across the board shutting down cryptocurrency investigations. And I will say that if anybody here works with cryptocurrency companies, on the panel included, or is at a cryptocurrency company, you know, our priority, of course, is to ensure that the U.S. public is not being harmed, even if it is with the usage of cryptocurrency. It's not like it's a get out of jail free card at all. And I will say that I know that there are some companies and that there are some individuals that have pointed to this ending regulation by prosecution and say, well, we have been proven right that the DOJ should not be focusing at all on cryptocurrency or cryptocurrency companies because, you know, the White House has stated that they're reprioritizing. And I will say that I think all of the great cases that we have worked, that we continue to work, have kept in mind these priorities throughout the prior administration and the current administration.
So Tigran, there have been a lot of high profile, I can't remember if Binance was one of them, in which at least agency action has been dropped. So how does Binance see the administration's changed view toward cryptocurrency?
Sure, I think this will be a long answer. Just to preface everything, right? So I think we're going to hear a lot of, you know, scary things about cryptocurrency and AI tonight, but I want to just kind of point out is if not for Bitcoin, if not for cryptocurrency, right? Many of the cases that we're kind of discussing would not be possible. Right? What cryptocurrency allowed us to do is investigate and trace financial crime and in an unprecedented way. Like it is the fact that it is a public blockchain, that all the transactions are posted, it was what allowed us to solve these cases. So yes, and the only reason why we're be able to sit here and talk about to the dollar how much these bad guys are spending or how much of this kind of dirty money is going into cryptocurrencies is because it is publicly visible. You have no idea how much banks are moving in there. through their accounts. You have no idea how much terrorists are moving through banks. What you do with cryptocurrency. And I think that's why it's also attracting so much more attention because how public it is. And I think same for AI. AI may sometimes get a bad rap, but I think it's empowered humans to do things that we're not able to do it's at an insane scale. So to me, all these technologies are net positive to humans. But with that being said, so for Binance, so I guess I was in a unique position for this case because I, along with Will, took down the first cryptocurrency exchange, right? BTC, it was an exchange. We arrested the administrator, we shut down the exchange and for BSA violations, for anti-money laundering violations. I guess in that example, which would fall under the current memo, we did seek knowledge, intent. We did extensive undercover operations where we did, which was important to me. I mean, that was kind of, maybe it was just the old way of fashioned way of doing things, which may not have been done in case of Binance. Again, I don't want to comment on that, but for us, it was important to get that knowledge part of it, right? The intent part of it, to get the company to communicate back to us that they knew that the money coming in is heroin proceeds, which is what we told them. We did months of undercover operations with hundreds of thousands of dollars through. They knew this was heroin proceeds when we're depositing cryptocurrency into the exchange. So I guess that would be the difference. As far as commenting on, the Binance case and DOJ action, like the company pleaded guilty. The CEO pleaded guilty. He did 4 months. Obviously, they admitted that there are certain violations in place. They paid a heavy fine. Whether or not that case will be pursued under the current memorandum is, I don't know, probably wouldn't. But to me, I think, it's important for us to recognize that it is a young industry. The companies make mistakes in the early stages. Binance grew from nothing to the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the span of a year, right? And I think it was 90 days became the largest exchange. So when they do these things, things break. And unfortunately for them, big things broke and they ended up settling and paying a heavy fine. And so to that point, I think as I was investigating, I think our investigations would fit under the memorandum. I don't think it's any different than, I think all of the pretty much investigations, major cryptocurrency investigations that I can think of would still fit under the current memorandum. I don't think it's necessarily changing much, just because I don't think anybody just went in and just did a BSA case. There's always considerations for the type of money or illicit funds that were going through the exchanges. So I think, to me, I guess not too much has changed. I don't know, Donovan?
And prioritizing terrorist organizations and cartels is I do appreciate that. And
But I do think
we all agree that.
But I do
that's
think it mentioned, not just the money going in. I think it's some of these cases have been, oh, well, this entity has had so much dirty money going through, but it's also making sure that the company was very much aware that those funds were going through it, right? I think.
I'll let Will jump in.
Well, just briefly, I'm not in the government anymore, so I can say this. At 25 years in the government, I probably got 100 of these. And for the folks that are actually bringing and so some government, somebody in DC would get up and say, everything's different now. I wrote a memo about this and we're going to do it different. And on the line, we'd take a look and we go, yeah, okay. All right. What was I doing?
But it's the same thing, right?
Because because many of these are, let's be honest, it's an opportunity to say you're doing something because you're there but when you actually get in the nitty gritty of it, things really are not that much different than they were before. And as an example, during not the last administration, but the one, during the Obama administration, a lot of it was marijuana. And it was, don't do these little rinky-dink marijuana cases. Well, nobody in the federal government was really doing rinky-dink marijuana cases at that time anyway. And so it was sort of, yeah, okay, like you can only do a marijuana case if it's a lot of marijuana or they have guns or a couple other things. And it was like, well, I wasn't doing that anyway, so thanks. But anyway.
So Will, you had brought up that sort of these smaller fraud cases, right? We're not going to see prosecutions in them. And I certainly have seen them, for example, insurance coverage disputes of people who've got an email that led them to give their Coinbase password and they lost their wallet. And so they sue, their insurance company won't pay up, or they'll try to sue Binance or Coinbase. So do you think we're going to see the private bar stepping in and trying to bring the suits against the exchange, the insurer, or whoever.
Yeah, so I think we already have, to a certain extent, except I'm not. They're sticking up for victims. I'm not sure they're going out. They're not catching the real bad guys, but they're sticking up for the victims, certainly. And so I think just during this year, there's been this is anecdotal, of course, but I've seen a huge number of cases against a lot of the sort of the payments platforms, and some of the ones that many that are crypto, but many that are not crypto and are sort of like more traditional, but still fintech companies like Apple, I think Block or Square or whatever they're called now, and others, but also a lot of the crypto, the Coinbases and et cetera, where the plaintiffs are suing the payments platform, not because they participated in the fraud, but because it was the mechanism by which the victim, who, similar to what Donovan had described in some of these smaller frauds, but where they got someone's attention, and whether it was, I'm a model and I want to hang out with you, or whether it was, I have a crypto investment that's going to be awesome, and they ended up getting ripped off. When they paid the money through this payments platform, whether it was Apple Pay or PayPal or Coinbase or something else. And the theory is that those platforms should have had better know your customer information. They should have been doing suspicious activity reports. They somehow should have caught that, even though to them it's just a payment, but at the end of the day, that the person receiving the money was not a real person, but actually was, a criminal syndicate operating out of Cambodia or whatever. And so that's the theory of these cases that I have seen. I don't know how many of them have or will go the distance or what'll happen, but it's certainly at least one measure. And I think, but it's going to have to be probably the class actions, because again, the amount of money lost in each of these transactions is not going to be worth bringing a lawsuit in and of itself.
Alex, is that something that keeps OpenAI awake at night? As you said, using the AI to commit crimes that.
It certainly does. And although it's a little different than the payment platforms or things like that, because ultimately what these AI systems are today, and they'll continue to evolve certainly, but they generate information, right? They sit on the side and you can query them and they will provide you with information on whatever topic you are asking the systems for. They're not going out in the world and doing things for you just yet. Although I think over the coming years, we'll see the AI systems start to engage with the world, agentic AI systems, where they can go out and, fill your shopping cart and purchase your groceries or finish your emails or, in the future, write code for you, build software and other things like that. And one day you can imagine these kinds of robotic systems being out in the world where there are product liability issues that you have to think about. But, when you think about just a system that provides you information that is in a lot of ways similar to a Google search, and so I don't think the legal liability issues flow quite the same way.
So we've been talking about cyber threats, and Tigran actually had an experience last year, somewhat related but unusual. So we thought and that Will was involved as well. So we thought this might be useful actually for all of you as well. So Tigran.
Sure. I guess where do I start? So I was so in my capacity as the head of financial crime compliance at Binance, one of my jobs was to be the head of the law enforcement liaison, which meant I got to travel the world and meet with law enforcement agencies, the heads of central banks, other functions, right, to figure out how can we work better with those countries, sign MOUs, assist with their investigations, set up task forces. So as part of that, I was invited to Nigeria to meet with the National Security Advisor to the President of Nigeria. That was in January, no, February 25th of 2024. Immediately at the meeting, instead of meeting with the National Security Advisor, I was taken hostage by the government of Nigeria and held for 8 months as leverage against my employer. So that was kind of the short version of the story, but it's yeah, and it took effort from both Will Franzen and Donovan, including high-level diplomatic engagements from Anthony Blinken, Chris Wray, Jake Sullivan, and Joe Biden to finally get me out in October of 2024. So it was in my capacity as a compliance officer. As I mentioned before, Binance had entered into a $4.3 billion settlement with the U.S. government, and corrupt governments around the world start seeing dollar signs, and that's what they try to leverage. And they try to leverage me to get a payout from Binance.
Yeah, so when they took him hostage, and obviously Tigran can tell you better himself, but at first he was moved to a safe house, I think for 3 weeks with a colleague. Eventually the colleague managed to escape, and having multiple, but at that time they were being kept in a house. And when the colleague managed to escape, having multiple passports, which I think they did not know, so he had dual citizenship, they took Tigran and put him in Kuje, which is a prison outside of Abuja in Nigeria, and is where they keep, Boko Haram and ISIS and so on. And so he was in a third floor prison cell for the remainder of his time in Nigeria, and contracted malaria, right? Eventually it aggravated a back condition to where you couldn't walk.
Yeah, I had to get surgery when I returned in November.
When he was released, he was in a wheelchair basically, except they wouldn't give you a wheelchair to go to court. He was in trial in Nigeria, which, as I came to learn, means you show up once a month maybe, and they ask 8 questions, which the judge takes down by hand, and then
the judges are glorified stenographers. They're just taking down what the basically the prosecution is saying, and it's kangaroo court. But at the same time, like you mentioned, Will, because my coworker escaped, it embarrassed kind of the government, and at that point, and it didn't help that Binance put out some press about, which we didn't mention before, is that this was my second trip to Nigeria. I was invited by the FIU a month before and had a meeting with the members of the Nigerian House of Representatives, where they solicited a $150 million bribe from Binance. When the meetings with their members of the House of Representatives, obviously it's illegal. We can't entertain a bribe, so we got out of country. And my second trip was actually to meet with the NSA to both discuss the bribery solicitation, as well as normally, cooperating, working together, resolving any regulatory issues that we may have in Nigeria. But because when they took me in, and the company went live with the news, and because of the embarrassment that my colleagues escaped had caused them, it really put them in a position where they had to make it look like this was some kind of a legitimate thing, right? While they tried to, shake down Binance for billions.
So to the ills of, or the threats of crypto, had nation state kidnapping and hostage taking, and it's anyway, it was kind of a crazy story, and I'll just add that it took the highest levels of government to get Tigran back, but the U.S. stepped up and got it done, and it took every branch of government to do it. After he got back, it was as sort of a strange twist. Tigran was talking about the case that he investigated involving one of the first large criminal exchanges that was basically a money laundering operation where we caught a Russian and he was here facing charges in the Northern District of California and was recently the individual who was traded to the Russians to get Mark Folger released, the school teacher who was being held in Russia. So after Tigran got out, the guy that he had caught as an agent was used to trade to get another American
I
out.
was at the State of the Union. It was sitting like probably 4 seats away from me, and it was he had no idea kind of what was it was very weird. But again, like I mentioned, our lives have been kind of intertwined even after I left. If not for Donovan, if not for Will, I mean, these guys are working night and day to get me out. So they were kind of there from day one. So that's
Can I ask you, what was Binance? Why did you go to Nigeria?
what.
Yeah, so why, yeah, I mean, I'm just like, you're.
So,
yeah.
it's just, so what happened was that after our initial meetings, right, which ended in the solicitation of $150 million.
Yeah, but what are you there for? Like, what's Binance? What business are they trying to attract? That's what I'm just. trying
Well,
to
I mean,
figure out.
so Binance is the world's largest exchange. They have about 250 million users around the world. Nigeria has the second largest adoption rate per capita after India. So Nigeria was a large crypto. It's a very young country, and it's a very high rate of crypto adoption. So they didn't have any crypto regulations. Nigeria had nothing. So what's happening essentially, the crypto businesses, not just Binance, were operating by Nigeria, but they don't actually have a cryptocurrency legal infrastructure in place to actually support crypto businesses. So what Binance was doing for the past 2 years is trying to arrange a meeting with the SEC to discuss licensing, to get things worked out, to settle any tax obligations, and they're kind of getting blown off. I mean, nobody was doing anything. So at the end of the day, when we went out there initially to have meetings, we met with their FIU, which is their equivalent of their FinCEN. We also had meetings with the House of Representatives, because what was happening is as soon as Binance settled with the US, they began making these allegations against Binance in Nigeria. And when we had a meeting, they solicited the $150 million bribe in order to make our issues go away. So the second meeting, which was what happened, is that our legal team, together with some people that they knew in country, wanted to schedule a meeting with the National Security Advisor, who's the leading law enforcement officer in country, in order to meet with them. And he was allegedly this anti-corruption guy, to have a meeting with them to both resolve any existing issues, to work with them on licensing, because the meeting was also supposed to be attended by the head of the Nigerian SEC and the central bank. So what was going to happen is that it was an intro meeting. I was the head of the FCC. I was the top law enforcement liaison for the company. So it was part of my job responsibility to do these meetings along with other people, but they didn't want to go. Anyway, that's it. So, but that's why I was there, is to resolve existing issues and also to strengthen our relationship with Nigeria, which I joke around, but yeah, 99% of the time, you don't get kidnapped when these meetings happen, but that 1%.
There's just one little piece of additional background, which is Nigeria's currency, the Naira, last year completely went in the tank. And in large part, that they depegged it from the US dollar, which was a decision that they made, which turned out apparently to be a bad decision. And so through this, part of the public statements about Binance and about Tigran were that Binance had caused the Naira to collapse because of adoption of cryptocurrency. Like they needed a boogeyman, the government needed a boogeyman on the basis that the currency was totally devaluing.
Yeah,
So I think, anyway, that.
No, crypto was a hedge against inflation. Instead of recognizing that, they needed something to blame. Whether or not they should have depegged Naira from the dollar, that's a separate conversation. I think it was probably the right thing to do because it was costing them a lot of money
To collapse because of adoption of cryptocurrency. Like they needed a boogeyman, the government needed a boogeyman on the basis that the currency was totally devaluing.
Yeah,
So I think, anyway, that.
No, crypto was a hedge against inflation. Instead of recognizing that, they needed something to blame. whether or not they should have depegged Naira from the dollar, that's a separate conversation. I think it was probably the right thing to do because it was costing them a lot of money.
Korea's currency, the Naira, last year completely went in the tank. And in large part, that they depegged it from the US dollar, which was a decision that they made, which turned out apparently to be a bad decision. And so through this, part of the public statements about Binance and about Tigran were that Binance had caused the Naira to collapse because of adoption of cryptocurrency. Like they needed a boogeyman, the government needed a boogeyman on the basis that the currency was totally devaluing. So I think, anyway, that.
No, crypto was a hedge against inflation. Instead of recognizing that, they needed something to blame. Whether or not they should have depegged Naira from the dollar, that's a separate conversation. I think it was probably the right thing to do because it was costing them a lot of money in order to
collapse because of adoption of cryptocurrency. Like they needed a boogeyman, the government needed a boogeyman on the basis that the currency was totally devaluing. So I think, anyway, that.
No, crypto was a hedge against inflation. Instead of recognizing that, they needed something to blame. Whether or not they should have depegged Naira from the dollar, that's a separate conversation. I think it was probably the right thing to do because it was costing them a lot of money in order to
collapse because of adoption of cryptocurrency. Like they needed a boogeyman, the government needed a boogeyman on the basis that the currency was totally devaluing. So I think, anyway, that.
No, crypto was a hedge against inflation. Instead of recognizing that, they needed something to blame. Whether or not they should have depegged Naira from the dollar, that's a separate conversation. I think it was probably the right thing to do because it was costing them a lot of money in order to keep the artificially affect the the monetary market. But what would happen is that when this happens, the general public didn't really understand what happened. The only thing they know is things are more expensive and my money's not worth as much. So the simplest way to do it is that it's an external force that's causing the Naira drop crypto. So to them, everybody knew Binance in countries because it's the largest exchange. So that for them, it was an easy way to kill two birds with one stone, get money and also get somebody to blame for their economic problems. So when I was there, I was getting blamed for collapsing their. Actually, recently, about a month ago, when the articles came out, when I finally came back home, and then everything was kind of made clear as to what happened, the conditions I was kept in, the corruption involved, the level of US involvement that had actually involved to get me out of there, and all the insanity that happened there. When that article came out and all the names are mentioned as retaliation, the Nigerian government sued me for $79 billion. So anybody has
wallet.
if anybody has any money, we're gonna collect some and pass around a thing. So
I take it you won't be going back.
yeah.
As his attorney, I've advised him not to try.
And how this
So-
applies to you. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
How this, when dealing with cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency investigations, or if you have a client that is, for example, starting an initial coin offering or starting some blockchain technology, it very quickly moves overseas, is what we've seen. Is that whether it is investors overseas or companies that have a reach overseas, that's something that we see, whether it's in crime or it's in even the venture capital realm, as we saw with Binance. It requires you to have that international perspective, especially with, for example, pig butchering, or those cases with fraud utilizing cryptocurrency within, literally in some cases within seconds, we will see those funds transferred to an exchange overseas where we are now working with international partners and, certain larger firms are working with their, satellite offices in Singapore or wherever it might be. And so I think that is something that this highlights is that when you're dealing with cryptocurrency, you're going to be entering into an international market, and there are sometimes ramifications of that. Hopefully not you being taken hostage, but that can have serious impact.
Yeah, and just being cognizant of the fact that not all good guys are actually good guys. Just because you're invited to a meeting, just be cognizant and just know who you're meeting. And if there are any issues that they could use, it's not safe for Americans to generally travel kind of around the world. as much as it was. And you have to recognize the fact that you are seen as an asset in certain parts of the world. And can be used as leverage.
So is it okay if we take questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
So I thought, I mean, we have this incredibly knowledgeable panel, so I do want to open up for questions. Yes, and if you could stand up and speak loudly.
Nothing we can do. We gotta say no. But we can say-
So the question, just for our cyber audience, is Mr. Danzig, a civil litigator, says his firm is getting many inquiries every week from victims, mostly elderly, who've been the victim of cyber crime, and because of Section 230, there often isn't legal recourse, but are there resources out there that they can direct these victims to? Maybe Donovan?
The first thing I would recommend, and this is for everybody, ic3.gov, so India Charlie 3.gov, Gamma Oscar Victory. And so if we require the FBI and DOJ, we require a verified complaint. And with that from, the elderly victim, we can work on that. Whether it's the transaction hash, whether it is a bank account. We actually have something called the financial fraud kill chain, where we literally have analysts sitting in front of 6 different screens, and they're reviewing complaints as they come in. And if it is fiat currency in a bank account, we have automatic connections with those bank not just the bank institutions, but also some specific agents at those banks, where they can freeze those funds while we are figuring out whether or not we can either file a seizure warrant or request a seizure warrant from the court, or if it's something that can be voluntarily frozen and redistributed back to the victim. When it comes to cryptocurrency, I mentioned how quickly it goes, how quickly it moves, but we still have some tools, and it very much depends on the timing. We need people to report quickly and also to give as many details as they possibly can, because although it might be one individual who just lost $16,000 or $100,000, it might connect back to a larger scheme. There are also resources online, such as with the CISA and FBI, that provide awareness and information about how to prevent yourself from falling for these scams. And also one reason why we do these presentations, why the Department of Justice and the government likes to have people speak about this, is for that awareness. But ic3.gov is the main intake. And, we have had great success in some cases, and in others we haven't, but we always want that complaint.
It's IC3,
ic3.gov.
numeral 3, ic3.gov. Make your complaint.
Sorry, if I can just add one thing, I'll put in a plug for a local group that has historically been very, very focused on pig butchering and other sort of smaller frauds, and has got great, very talented people working there. And if it falls below the federal threshold, which most of these do, that is a possible resource. I just don't know how overburdened they are at this particular point. But in Santa Clara, and whether they have jurisdiction, depending on where it occurred, but in Santa Clara County is called the REACT Task Force, REACT, REACT. And they have historically been more focused than any other group I'm aware of on that level of specifically crypto, but otherwise cyber fraud. And they've got top-notch people on tracing. They've got the right tools. They've got the right software, which is software we're all aware of, but most people can't afford, and things like that. They've got very, very talented, good people down there. I don't know what their capacity is, because this is I get the same calls, but they are very, very good.
Yeah, and that's correct, Will. And I've seen, so part of my job required me to actually approve seizures that came in, and I want to say that there's nothing that can be done. And but I do applaud you for at least like telling them no, because a lot of people don't. Unfortunately, there's an entire industry behind this that actually takes advantage of victims, creating secondary victims in a process because they do overpromise on what they can be delivered, right? They take money, they pay $5,000 up front, saying that they can help them recover these funds, they can do this and that. Instead, they just end up wasting more money because at the end of the day, it's very limited in what you can do through civil action. Ordinarily, it's going to require quick action, usually by law enforcement, through seizure warrant, or if they can, freeze request. Unfortunately, what you're dealing with is most of the time is exchanges that are based offshore, right? So it's usually it's on them, and it's a voluntary thing that they will be willing to do is to freeze an account temporarily. What you can get is sometimes, at least for Binance's, which you'd have a trusted partner in space that essentially would vouch for the legitimacy of the investigation or the work, that then you can go in and make a compliance call to temporarily restrict the account, but to allow the law enforcement to come in, seizure warrant in order to recover those funds. So there has been some success. Unfortunately, you have to move extremely quickly because the funds do move quickly, and by the time law enforcement contacts you or somebody contacts you, the money's long gone, and then there's nothing to recover. So that's the unfortunate part of it.
You had a question here? So the question is there a 3-day window for making the complaint on ic3.gov for that freeze?
Oh, no, you can report anytime. No, but if you're talking about like success rate, I will say that overall, the sooner you can report it from the incident, like, within 24 hours is ideal. What we're dealing with is for fiat currency, like with financial institutions like that are not cryptocurrency. They have a minimum of 3 days to clear the transaction. And so what we'll see is that if it's within that 3-day window, we're usually able to freeze and respond, or at least the bank is. But if it's past 3 days, it's much, much more difficult. Any other questions?
Yes. Oh.
Yeah, we use that term. I mean, I
The
describe.
question is, what is pig butchery?
You fatten a pig and then you butcher it.
Yeah, it's like the idea that they will have these cryptocurrency investment schemes or even fiat currency investment schemes where, they say, you give us $10, we'll give you $20. Now you give them $100 and you might actually get $200 back. And so they call that, like it's luring somebody into believing that the cryptocurrency or financial investment scheme is legitimate and that it's making them money. And then when the victim puts in, say, $10,000 or whatever it might be, $1 million, that's when they pull the rug out and they take the funds. And so it's basically a type of fraud where, they might actually be giving some money back to lure the victim into giving as much as they possibly can, and then they take it and disappear. And there are known money laundering networks that are utilized to move the funds very, very quickly. And so that is essentially the bane of all of our existence. And with AI, not to denigrate AI at all, but one of the issues is that they are getting so much better at communicating and convincing individuals. I mean, in the past, a person would come to the FBI or come to the DOJ and say, I really believe that this was Brad Pitt. And all the individual on the other side, all they did was send a photo of Brad Pitt. And you're like, well, I'm really
actually
sorry, but
happened.
maybe shouldn't fall in for that. But, we'll still work the case. But now with certain types of AI technology, they will actually get photos of what looks to be Brad Pitt writing the person's name with like the the current date and say like, no, this is really me. I actually am Brad Pitt. And so these types of deep fakes and LLMs to communicate in a convincing manner, I know that that's what Alex.
LLM is large
Sorry, large
language model.
language model.
I met that in our pre.
That is what Alex works on, is to prevent the technology from being used to victimize individuals. But we're just going to see more and more and more of it in a more sophisticated manner.
And if, let me pick up on that and say,
Please.
too, there's no doubt, right? That those things happen and we see them happening on our platform, and they're also prevalent. Even if, we could catch every instance, there are open source models that somebody could use to commit, the same kind of fraud. But we do take that kind of issue seriously. We have dedicated teams of investigators that are looking for these kinds of identifiers. And one of the most interesting things about the work that our investigators are doing is that they are also doing a much better job at catching this kind of activity by leveraging artificial intelligence, right? It is impossible to have a platform like ours that has, on any given week, 500 million users who are using their ChatGPT to help them in their everyday lives. But we can train the models to say, look out for these patterns where somebody is attempting to impersonate a celebrity and is asking for investment or is generating text that is trying to generate romantic interest from victims or whatever they are. And then we can generate classifiers that allow us to identify particular accounts that are engaging in that kind of activity, to identify this stuff and to make sure that we can get rid of as much of this type of activity off of our platforms. And as Donovan says, that is a lot of the work that we are doing and that peer companies are also doing to try to prevent our tools from being used in that way.
And I
Sorry, just wanted understanding almost nothing about AI, but like it is fascinating to me that one of the things we've talked about is the lack of available the strains on the system of being able to run all these things down. What Alex is talking about now, where if you are able to do that in that kind of manner, rather than having an army of human agents, is fascinating to me.
Yeah, I will say there are two things to this. Anytime I give a presentation, I give a lot of presentations about cyber threats. And the number one question is, well, how does AI change all of this? And there's two things I want to say, and I'm sure Alex will have comments about it. One is, if you have a library with all of information that humans have ever thought of, have everything that they ever could have written, and not just in the history, but in the future, which is basically the internet now. What matters is not having access to that information. It's finding the information you need, right? And if you have the Library of Babylon with all human information, what you're going to need is a guide to get to exactly which book you're looking for. Right now, the system's not great for finding that book that you need, but it is getting better and better every day. And so pretty soon, OpenAI and other AI companies will get you to exactly the information that you're looking for, and present it and provide it in a way that you uniquely will be able to understand it. And so our fear is that you can get a book about, crawdads and how to make a good gumbo. But if you're a terrorist, you are looking for that information to help you build a bomb in the kitchen of your mother in a way that you understand without a chemistry background. Fortunately, we know that companies like OpenAI and Google and all the other different companies that are working on LLMs that are in the United States, that they are working within guardrails to prevent that terrorist from finding that information that they need, and also working with that AI to develop that bomb or to develop that biological weapon. What we are especially concerned about are those individuals, and combined with those systems, that don't have those guardrails, where we know for a fact, we have seen adversaries working to jailbreak LLMs, to jailbreak AI, to help them obtain the information that they want to do harm to the United States. And I am especially concerned about agentic AI, where you can order that AI agent to do something on your behalf. I know that this is a great concern of yours, Alex, and it's a great concern of all the AI companies that are legitimate and that are working with the government and are working generally to prevent harm from being done to the United States and its people. I worry more about those companies that are in it just for the cash, that don't care about the guardrails, knowing that more and more people are going to use them, or some people are going to use them because there are no guardrails. Do you have any comment?
Do you want to respond, Alex?
I mean, that is really well said. What I will say is a variation of the analogy too, which is that when you have so many signals in the world, trillions of digital signals, we don't have enough human eyes on the planet to be able to review all of that stuff, to catch all of the bad content that is, sprinkled in between all of the good things that people are doing on using AI systems or just generally in cyberspace. And that is where like artificial intelligence can be really helpful, because it can review all of those signals to be able to understand what is the truly harmful stuff. And I see there is a burning question.
Right.
So, yeah. Yeah, it's a great question.
Want to repeat the question?
Yeah.
Or,
Why don't you-
well, yeah, repeat the question, Alex.
So the question is, what is our perspective on AI transparency laws and also standards like C2PA? And what I would say is that the devil's in the details, right? Not all of, I mean, we don't support every piece of legislation in that space. But there are important elements of trying to figure out, like, should AI companies and any service that provides AI generated images be required to, say this is an AI generated image. The problem with that is that that kind of watermarking doesn't necessarily always work the way that it's intended, right? C2PA is a standard where you assign metadata to a particular image. And the challenge there is that metadata can be taken off as easily as it's added on. And even watermarks that are within an image, within the four corners of an image or a video or a sound bite, can similarly be altered, added, or removed. And even if you had every legitimate player in the AI space adding those kind of watermarks, what about the services that are out there that don't include those watermarks? And so are you really providing the world with certainty that certain images are valid or not valid if you only can make sure that some of them are actually going to be coded the way that you want them to be coded? One thing, and this is me speaking personally, but one way to think about this is to invert it. If we really want certainty that the information we are getting is accurate, what you really ought to be doing is digitally signing the things that are accurate. The Getty pictures, the folks who are out in the field working for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, making sure that their pictures are digitally signed and that you can ensure that that image, it was taken where they said it was taken and that somebody can vouch for its authenticity. We should be looking for the markers of how do you know the thing that you are getting, that it is true, rather than expecting that everybody who is creating disinformation or deep fakes or things like that will properly mark that, because the reality is you will only ever have partial coverage in that space. But we work closely with C2PA and certainly it's something that like we are actively engaged in trying to find a solution on.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing all their experiences in Tigray. And again, we're so happy to have you here and glad you're able to.
Home in America.
Thank you.
We'll be around if you have any further.